It isn't going to be very interesting of me to say that I'm not the biggest Tim Burton fan in the solar system. I think it gets to the point where any cranky film snob decries Burton as being overrated, the stuff of suburban teenage girls and children who aren't even aware of who he is, but like his saturated, imposing style, particularly within his 21st century features. Say Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Alice in Wonderland, Dumbo, or maybe Beetlejuice. I would say I don't have anything against him or his films, and that my not caring for them is simply a matter of preference and inconsequential subjective opinion, though he was adored and revered for so much for what I consider to be superficial, cutesy, dumbed down, pandering, performative quirkiness, that I grew to really resent the director and his quite nauseating films. Yes, there are a couple of exceptions, but just a couple. I'm fond of Batman 89. I've discussed this before on the program, despite its evident flaws and its weaknesses as an adaptation, a certain lack of loyalty to the source material. There is a lot I really appreciate about his Batman exercise, or at least how he chose to compromise with the material itself. The more control he had, demonstrated in Batman Returns, the worse off we all were, clearly. Oh, and the other is Ed Wood, quite obviously. That's what everyone always says. Oh, I don't like Tim Burton, but Ed Wood, that was a great movie. And yeah, I agree with the sentiment. That sentiment, even though I agree with it, gets annoying after a while, though I can't deny appreciating the film. Most of what its impassioned champions are praising about the film is indeed thoroughly praiseworthy. I feel like I ought to be ranting about something related to this film. Perhaps the sentimental, self appreciating vomit which certain well known internet film reviewers have spewed over this film, but at least they're doing so over a really worthwhile film. Though I will say, if you want quality films from 1994, aside from a couple of more obvious, though still potentially highly classic, films from that year, you had Carpenter's seminal In the Mouth of Madness, the best Lovecraft film to not adapt Lovecraft's work, the really strong British film Madness of King George, the exemplary American independent film from the great Michael Almereyda, Nadia, as well as world cinema triumphs such as Peter Watkins' dedicated project The Freethinker, on the subject of the extremely iconic, in Sweden, Swedish artistic paragon August Strindberg. Like many of Watkins' films, it is very long, but also incredibly worthwhile to sit down with. The Filipino odyssey known as Why is Yellow in the Middle of the Rainbow, directed by Kidlat Taimik, a home movie essay film undertaking, not too dissimilar to the classic John Smekis work of 1969 we all know as Walden. There's the Italian rendition of the Book of Genesis, or rather the great Italian auteur, Omano Olmi's rendition, produced as part of a series for stridently religious purposes, although Olmi chose to use the opportunity to realize his generally art film adjacent biblical voyage. It is titled Genesis, the Creation and the Flood. And finally, I'd like to make mention of two Polish films, Johnny Waterman from Jan Jacob Kolski, who is a stellar director and seemingly less regarded by international admirers of the recognized Polish visionaries, Wajda, Skolimowski, Kieslowski, Wojciech Has, Zulawski, Zanussi, even Kawalerowicz. And then, speaking of less regarded or recognized Polish filmmakers, the quite evidently gifted Dorota Kedzierzałska, and her film Roni, which translates into English as Crows. You don't get to become familiar with all of those films I mentioned and still have a great admiration for the wider work of Tim Burton, though at least in my case I still wholly appreciate Ed Wood. I can't help but enjoy myself if it is playing on a TV in my vicinity, and the fact that of all his many successful films commercially, this was the exception, is a disheartening consideration. Although given what the public is willing to pay and undignifyingly clap at, we cannot be entirely surprised it is a public that is partly moulded and shaped by Burton's other, much crappier films, so he really, at least, cannot complain too much. Unless he completely surprises me with an upcoming film he releases, this will be the last Tim Burton film ever discussed here on the channel, and I rather doubt that anyone will have a problem with that, upliftingly.